Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Whitehouse. I haven't met most of you before, but I am the moderator and marker for 6ULSC, Leading Strategic Change for ABE. Just wanted to do this presentation for basically all of you that may just want a few tips in terms of how to submit a successful assignment. So I shall just share my screen with you, and we'll just go through what we've prepared. Okay, so yes, here we are. Just the cover sheet here, Leading Strategic Change, how to submit a successful assignment. We'll just go through slide by slide, and we'll have a question and answers section at the end. So we'll see how we go. Again, I've just introduced myself, so here I am, Sophie Whitehouse, moderator marker for 6ULSC, or Leading Strategic Change at ABE. So we'll start just with very basics, and I will apologise in advance if some of this is a little bit too basic for you, but I just want to make it clear so there are no assumptions. Okay, so that way we're all on the same hymn sheet, so to speak. Okay, so level 6 is quite a big step up from level 5. With level 6, you are expected to provide an in-depth answer to show you've got a good understanding of the learning outcomes in the study guide. Each answer means you need to demonstrate and you need to focus. And you've got to have some clearly thought out ideas. And the best way to do that is planning, but we'll go through that in a few slides later. In terms of each argument or each point you're trying to present, it's got to be structured, it's got to be in full sentences, with each idea separated into paragraphs. Ideally, we don't want bullet points because we want something a bit more in depth, but we'll get that detail a little bit later. Okay, so first things first, command words. We'll go through some sample questions in a moment to sort of dissect each and every one of these. But the first word you will see a lot of in level 5 rather than level 6 is explain. Now here you need to set out purposes or reasons. When you explain something, you need to describe it in more detail or set out the relevant facts. And you're just basically describing something for what it is and not a lot more else apart from providing some support and some reasoning as to why things are what they are. But it is not a lot more than describing something. Okay, so with this word, we will not cover that in this session. However, we will cover the others that are a lot more detailed. In terms of critically analyze, this is a lot more in depth than explain. In explain, you're just describing something or defining something, so to speak. Well, it's a little bit more defined, but a little bit more than defined. But anyway, with critically analyzing, okay, it means you've got to separate the answer into key components. Okay, so that means reading the question really, really carefully, or in terms of an assignment, their tasks. So an analysis is not a description or a statement relating to something, but it is a breakdown of what these key components are, and then you need to apply it back to the question that you're being asked. Again, I will keep repeating this, it is not a list. Okay, quite often we see a list and that really limits our marking, if that makes sense. Next, we have critically evaluate. So here you need to make some sort of judgment from the available evidence. And you've got to have pros and cons of something. You've got to use examples. You've got to reference your examples and reference your sources to validate what you're trying to say, and then make a judgment that is not biased. Okay, so really the word critical means you've got to think about something in an unbiased way. Okay. Then, when you do make a judgment, you need to go a little bit further and argue its quality, importance, value, relevance, and or effectiveness. Okay, so you need to do just that little bit more as to why you're making the judgment that you are making. All right, so then next in this is justify. So in terms of justifying, you just need to present a reasoned case for actions or decisions that are made. So why have you come up with this judgment? You will also need to demonstrate and provide evidence supported, and the best way to do that is through examples and well-supported examples on the internet from reliable sources. Sources like essays.com or I think Assignments for You, Tutor for You, they are really not that reliable. You need to sort of go into some business journals or, annual reports of companies, something that is completely validated. Okay, last one in this list we've got is suggest. Here, you need to give possible alternatives, come up with an idea, and then put forward an idea for consideration. So once you've got all the examples and everything in place, if you're asked to suggest something, then you've got to basically put forward a few alternatives and say why you're doing it. So we'll move on to the next slide, which here we are. We've just pulled out a few example tasks from previous 6U LSC papers. So these are the questions and tasks or tasks you're likely to come up against. Okay, so we're going to say task 1 here broken up into A and B. Okay, task 1A, critically evaluate your chosen organization's vision and value statements and suggest ways they could be improved. Okay, so before we proceed, you've got the command words there, critically evaluate and suggest. Then we move on to number B. Critically analyze the CEO's role in communicating the improved vision and value statements to relevant stakeholders. Within your answer, you are also required to justify the leadership approach that the CEO should adopt. So again, here we've got the command words of critically analyze and justify. Okay, but before we proceed, and we will go through this in the next slide, take very good notice of the number of marks that are allocated. And I will keep touching on this throughout this whole presentation. So normally with 6U LSC assignments, there's 100 marks and expected around about 4,000 words. So when something's 10 marks, we allocate 10% of the total words. Okay, this is before you do anything, before you even attempt to answer. This is how you start to plan. Okay, allocate your wording. So 10% of 4,000 is 400 words. So I would expect to see here about 400 words. Okay, if you go 440, that's about the maximum you can go, but no more. Next, 15 marks. Okay, so with 15 marks, we're expecting about 600 words. Again, 660, probably maximum, no more. So you need to know when to stop at these cutoff points. This is very, very important because as markers, we will not mark anything over and above 10% of your allocated wording or the wording we expect you to allocate. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. Now here we're going to break down the example. Okay, so we've isolated the three command words, but 2 groups of command words, one being critically evaluate, one being suggest. And then there's that 10 marks. So number 1, as we discussed previously, allocate the number of words. Okay, 10 marks, I expect 400 words, thereabouts. Oops, slide says 600 words, but it's really 400 words, 440 maximum. Number 2, critically evaluate. So go back, if you're unclear about what these words mean, go back to the command word definition. It is definitely on the website of ABE, and then find the vision and value statements of your chosen organization. Okay, so here, use the theory in the study guide to help you make a judgment on how these statements can be improved by finding pros and cons for each. And then find examples, and then use this as evidence to discuss each component. We'll go through an example answer in the following slide. Number 3, Suggest. Again, go back to the command word definition. What does suggest actually mean? Use the relevant theory and present the reasoning behind these statements on how they can be improved. And number 4, I will keep stressing this, do not put the discussion forward as a list. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Now, this is an extract answer that we've got randomly. So we've just pulled out a component, okay? Now, here, vision statement. So here are Coca-Cola's vision statement is to craft the brands and choice of the drinks that people love, refresh them in body and soul. Okay, so this is obviously taken off, and we'll, you can see there's another line there, but it's taken from the Coca-Cola Company. So you can see the source here has been referenced. Okay, then this individual goes on to suggest when analyzing the Coca-Cola vision statement, it's got a lot of key information. So this person has pulled out some key components of the vision statement and then interpreted it. Okay. Next, we say the vision statement, it identifies organizational aspiration, values, and design outcome. So then this person's gone back to the theory and saying, okay, does this vision statement actually do that? So then we get a judgment out of them by saying the statement doesn't give much information about plan. It talks more about the present situation rather than the future. It could have indicated its achievement as the currently leading brand in the market it operates in. Okay, and then it gives us an improved statement. So here we are. So the improved vision statement needs to be continuing being a leading brand and differentiated drinks that people love to refresh them in body and soul, and continuing to create a more sustainable business and better shared future that will always make a difference in people's lives, community, and the planet. All right, so now we're going to dissect this sample answer. So here we are, breakdown of that answer. So what this answer has, it defines a vision statement, which is theory that's derived from the study guide. Number 2, it gives us the organizational vision statement, which is an example of Coca-Cola, probably from the annual report itself. Number 3, or the Coca-Cola website. Number 3, the pros and cons of the vision statement in the context of Coca-Cola. This student has done this very, very well. Yeah, when we've dissected it before. Number 4, how the vision statement needs to be improved or to improve. And then number 5, an actual suggested new vision statement. In terms of what the answer is missing, I haven't found anything. In terms of 1A, if we go back to what we're being asked to do, critically evaluate, which it's done. It's actually gone to the command word definition. It's found the vision statement. It's used the theory in the study guide. It's made a judgment on how they can be improved, found pros and cons of each, and then found examples and used it as evidence. Okay. And then we go to the word suggest. Again, they've defined the relevant theory and they've presented reasoning behind how the statement can be improved. So I have actually found no problem with this answer. For me, it's perfect. Okay, so now we're going to go to task 1B. So 1B then says critically analyze the CEO's role in communicating the improved vision and value statements to relevant stakeholders. Within your answer, you are also required to justify the leadership approach the CEO needs to adopt. Okay, so we've identified the command words, critically analyze, justify. Number 1, we allocate the number of words, 15%, about 600 words. Again, I wouldn't go over 660. Number 2, critically analyze, what does it actually mean? Go back to the definition. Separate the components of the CEO's role. Use the theory in the study guide. Compare it to your chosen organization's CEO. Find examples. Use this as evidence to discuss each of these components. Okay, with a company like Coca-Cola, or we're going to use a different company in this 1B example, with big examples like Apple, you have a lot of information about the CEO, especially, let's face it, Tesla, Elon Musk, you've got a lot of information about the CEO and their behavior. and also what they're expecting. Okay, so you've got a lot to go on with there in terms of the internet. Then we go to number 3, justify. Again, go back to the command word definition, use the relevant theory, and put forward your idea for your CEO's leadership approach. Okay, so you can, and then use examples that would apply for your organization. There's a lot of information for some of these bigger companies. With the smaller companies, you probably won't find as much information, but the benefit is by not being inundated with stuff on the internet, you can actually find some information, apply some judgment, find some evidence. It's not, people that tend to choose smaller companies tend to be, from my experience as a market, they tend to be better at finding and using their judgment because you're not inundated with so much information on the internet. But again, that's your decision to make in terms of what company you choose. Number 4, I will keep repeating this. Do not put this forward as a list. All right, so we'll go next slide. We'll just break this down. Okay, we've got an extract of an answer here of 1B. Now, the concept of building trust, it's all in our study guides. We're starting with the first command group of words, which is critically analyze. Building trust is in the study guide. You've got the theory. Okay, when a leader wants to communicate the improved statements to the relevant stakeholders, he or she should build trust. Okay, and then you've got the referencing there as well. And then according to Kester 2020, so this person's gone over and above, they've found some more theory on a different source, they've named that source. 55% of CEOs think that lack of trust is the threat to the organization's growth. So here they are, they're being critical, and they're analyzing the concept of trust. So it is very significant for the leader to be trusted by applying all of the core values of an organization, since they're strongly linked with trust. So you see what they've done. They've linked the improvements in the value statement from 1A to 1B, concept of trust. Okay, this will surely make the relevant stakeholders to convincingly remain committed to the change that the leaders are bringing. The main importance of building trust is that it improves the stakeholders' satisfaction. Okay, so now they're going into the stakeholders. So how the company is perceived by relevant stakeholders, like your employees, your shareholders, your community, and vice versa. Then leader should avoid the tendency of enjoying the status that accompanies his or her role, though it is a nature to be leader. Okay, so again, they've named the source, and they're actually throwing out a theory of avoiding the temptation to, I guess, get caught up in the status. Okay, so then here we are in the Coca-Cola company core values. There is integrity and accountability. So the CEO must demonstrate these behaviors when trying to communicate the change. Leaders need to talk straight, show respect, create transparency, do the right things, listen first, etc., in order to build and maintain trust. Okay, so it's telling you how you've got to gain trust as a leader. So we'll go to the next slide and we will break the sample answer down. Okay, apologies, I'm into the next slide, is the next part of the question, which is justify. Now the word justify, remember, go back to your definition. So how are we going to justify the whole concept of the CEO in terms of the various theories? Okay, so if I go back to the task, sorry, I will be jumping to and fro. It says you're required to justify the leadership approach. Okay, so you find what the leadership, you break down what the leader is actually doing, and then you've got to justify it. Okay, so here we are. I've got another answer here. This one's Apple. Okay, so while leading strategic change, it is important for the CEO to be seen as authentic by the relevant stakeholders of the company, especially in the case of embedding the vision of Apple. Authentic leadership is at its core a style of leadership that focuses on establishing the leader's legitimacy through honest team interactions built on a moral foundation. This strategy is more important than ever before, not only for overall morale, but also for business. authentic leaders have qualities which include, number one, transformational. This is about bringing change in the organization's performance and transforming things for the better of the stakeholders. Number two, ethical. This refers to relating to moral principles, doing and saying things that are morally right for the stakeholders. Number three, empowering others, leading with purpose, honesty, sincerity, and integrity. Okay, so now we will try to break this all down. Okay, so in part one, the breakdown of the sample answer, you will see we've gone through, or this learner has gone through the whole concept of building trust, which is a huge part of the CEO's role. So big tick there for me. I would say that was satisfactorily critically analysed. Number two, they've also got an example relating to that theory. Number three, they've also used core values of integrity and accountability. But what this answer is missing, if you haven't noticed it already, is the relevant examples that relate to Coca-Cola. So where is there an example of the CEO of Coca-Cola where they've demonstrated a way to build trust? I mean, have they, for instance, taken, if there was some sort of disaster or something that's gone wrong in the company, how has that CEO then taken the action to sort of gain confidence of various stakeholders, whether they're employees, the community, the public? So that, again, with something like Coca-Cola, you would be able to find something on the internet regarding the actions that the CEO has taken to build trust. Number two, here we need to find examples of Coca-Cola demonstrating integrity and accountability. Again, the internet, there is a wealth of information on there. You will be able to find, or this learner would be able to find, examples of how this particular leader used integrity and accountability. So you'll notice if we go back to the previous slides, I mean, in terms of theory and analysis, it's brilliant, but we just needed some examples in there just to make it a good answer into an excellent answer. And that's all it would take. Okay, so then we'll go, break down. Okay. I've got breakdown. Oops, I'm sorry, I've gone back too far here. Okay. Now I've got building trust. That's what I wanted. We've gone here and then we've got here. Okay, so there we are. And then we are in part two. Sorry, back on track now. So part two, the answer has the theory relating to the leadership approach. So I think the learner in this case has discussed authentic leadership very, very well. And number two is this answer also contains what being an authentic leader means in relation to Apple. I think the learners discussed that very, very well. However, just one thing is missing is just some supported examples that show how the CEO of Apple has demonstrated authentic leadership, transformational, ethical, empowering others. There will be a lot of information. I mean, you know, definitely you'll see their philanthropic activities in terms of Apple, how in terms of transformational, how they've treated their employees, the benefits they give their employees, ethical, have they actually gone out to the community and provided iPads, for instance, for underprivileged children. This will all be available on the internet. Again, if I go back to this answer, you'll see the theory is brilliant and how they've dissected that is brilliant, but it's a good answer in terms of an excellent answer. All you needed to do was add a few examples that would be in relation to the organization that you've chosen, rather than just analyzing the theory out of the study guide and left it at that. So we'll move on. What to do when you feel your answer is complete? Okay, so once you feel that you've done, okay, in this case, task 1 and A, I've done everything I can now, I've met up the word limits, then number 1, go back to the assessment criteria. Does this actually answer what's expected of you in terms of task 1? So in this example, we've got criteria 1.1 to 1.3 in the study guide. So go through those. If you feel that you've completely answered them, move on to the next task. Now, number 3, I will stress that there are no hard and fast rules here in terms of the order of how you complete the tasks, but it is recommended that you try to respect the intelligence of the sequence in the tasks. So again, I will touch on this later. Okay, this is how we do it. How the tasks all fit together. So I've got a few slides here, and we are going to go into a little bit of detail, but I will try to keep it as simple as possible in terms of this is how we see things as markers. Now, the example shows again 1A and 1B. I won't read them again. We've gone through them in depth over the last few slides. So then in terms of how you interpret those tasks is number 1 as a whole, so both 1A and B, as it means they identify the statements, you suggest improvements, and then look at the CEO's role in how to communicate these statements along with identifying various leadership principles. And in this next example, we've got tasks 2A and 2B. So I will read out what each of them say. So in this case, it's critically examine your chosen organization's competitive position in the market by using Porter's 5 forces model. Within your answer, you are required to identify a change the organization should make based on your examination of its competitive position. 2B, conduct an impact analysis of the potential effect of the change you've identified in 2A. Use the relevant theory to support your answer. So in this case here, we've been asked to use the Porter model. It's 13 marks, okay? Go back to our allocation. 13 marks would generally be a little bit under 600 words. We've been asked to use Porter. Do not use another model because that is the wording is very tight. So try to stay within those limits. So now here we are using the Porter model. You discuss or you just dissect each component or each layer within the Porter model. And then within that, you ought to try to find a change that would help your chosen organization. So use point 1 of Porter and then use an example relating to your organization. And then at the very end of each layer and each example you've used, try to find a change that would benefit the organization. Then from this, look towards the impact analysis. We've found the change, and now what you need to do is conduct an impact analysis. Again, use the theory. Okay, so you can use, there are a number of theories you can use, like the kaleidoscope, and in this case, rather than it's 12 marks, it's not a lot, the wording's going to be quite tight. So rather than get caught up in what we call theory dumping, in just listing the theory, try to identify some key points there that relate to this change and to that organization. And again, try to find some examples to illustrate your points and reference your sources. Next one. Okay, so then we're on to task 3. So 3A, it asks you to propose a plan to implement and monitor the required change highlighted in task 2A. Use relevant models and theories in your answer. 3B, critically examine 2 ways that individuals within your chosen organization might be supported through this period of change with the reference to appropriate theory. Again, take note of the marks, take note of the words you need, first thing. And next is go through, in terms of 3A, go through the relevant models that there are. There are plenty, but try to pick a few that will apply to this question or task. So here, there's a model like Kotter, which basically talks about implementing the plan. And then you can easily dissect the theory, but then please throw in some examples that relate to your case organization. So you can illustrate how the change will need to be planned and implemented. Then the better learners or the stronger learners will use things like a SMART plan where you would construct a plan, use your change, and then work out some sort of timeline as to how this change can be implemented. Okay, again, keep going back, relevant examples. And then choose another model like the PDCA to reflect how the change can be monitored and reviewed. Again, throw in an example. And that will cover that completely. So then we got 3B. So here, choosing a model like Connor and some various support mechanisms. Again, there's only 10 marks here. So many times you see the question asks you there are 2 ways. Okay, don't do any more than 2. A model like Connor is good to start with because then you could actually work through the informed optimism and so forth, but use examples and don't get caught up in the theory. And then the support mechanisms like your training, your redeployment, your counseling, there's many, pick 2. And then apply to your organization. Many people here do not apply this to their organization. They just list it. So do that again will be a perfect answer. Then we go part 3. So again, this is task 4. So this task, for some reason, learners really struggle with it, and they tend to be confused with task 1. So if you remember, task 1 is about things like authentic leadership, building trust, and the vision and value statement. So it's where we start, and this relates to the leader himself or herself. Whoops. So this is just focused on the leader, okay? Not on the leader's communication. This is just focused on the leader in terms of how they can improve and how they can lead this change that you've identified in task 2 going forward. So again, it's 25 marks. So 25 marks tells us that there's going to be a lot required of us here. So this will be in the region of 1,000 words. So there's a lot to put in here. So this is where learners need to piece it all together. And what I would recommend in this case is start with a SWOT of the CEO or the company leader. So here you can identify the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats of the CEO as a person, not the organization, the person. Okay, if the CEO could be a weakness in terms of they're not a good communicator or they're not a good team leader, so to speak, then the weaknesses open up opportunities and they open up ways to improve. Okay, same as the threats. So then a good way from here is to identify leadership styles that would apply to the CEO. Okay, and always work back to your organization. So leadership styles, again, we've got a whole list of them in the study guide. Only pick a few that would apply to this CEO. Okay, so in terms of the strength in their leadership styles, are they very authoritative? And sometimes there's a reason for that and there's a need for that, but sometimes the downside of being very authoritative is that you can intimidate your staff and that you can get to a stage where you're not able to lead this change that we've identified. So try to pick fewer leadership styles and try to be very critical about them in terms of your CEO or organizational leader. Okay, I will say it is not a list, but use the weaknesses and threats going forward by formulating a personal development plan that I will call a PDP. So then how the leader can work on improving their weaknesses. If the leader is authoritative and intimidating as a weakness or a threat, then in terms of personal development plan, they can go on, for instance, a soft skills course and have that monitored going forward. So they can actually develop their skills and that way they can lead the change, okay, more successfully. And then once they've done all those various training courses or whatever improvements that you've suggested, reviews are important, like your 360 degrees and your long-term career development. So that's a lot in there, and 1,000 words is actually quite tight. So I will emphasize the tasks like this, generally number 4, really related to the CEO, not the organization as a whole. And the theory needs to contain examples that relate to the CEO of the organization. So going forward, we've got tips. Okay, so I've stressed this quite a bit here. Tips are allocate your wording and plan in advance. This is the number one thing to do before you even put your pen to paper, so to speak, or finger on the keys, is your wording. Okay, go through what each of the questions are in terms of marks and allocate the 10% wording. And if you're in danger of going over, refine what you've done so far, do it piece by piece, and that way it is not a cumbersome task at the end. Stick to these limits, because remember, as markers, we will not mark beyond 10% more than the expected words. Please don't put in appendices. We don't mark them. Introductions and conclusions are not marked. You're welcome to put them in, but that eats into the 4,000 words, and sometimes you really need, the 4,000 words are very tight, so sometimes you will really need it. In terms of diagrams and graphs, they're nice to have, but please don't overdo them, because they start to lose relevance after a while. So I'd already put a few in there. Please don't put in too many. And in terms of your discussion, let it flow. Use paragraphs, use grammar, and use examples. And there are various techniques that you can look up, like SEIZE, S-E-I-Z-E. You can Google that one in terms of how to basically evaluate, interpret. That's what the E and the I stand for. And then use your examples at the end. Okay, so that way you're basically presenting a case and a judgment that's unbiased. That's what we want to come across as. And use current examples. What many people use examples, say, from 2008, which is fine. But then we're in 2022 now. So a lot has happened since then. We've had the pandemic, we've had, war in Ukraine. So it's important to try to keep current with your examples and how they impact your case organization, and how these theories are even impacted by each of these current events. And reference all your sources. We are very strict on plagiarism. So if we have the software to detect sources that are not your own, and if you claim that they are your own words, then unfortunately the learner will be penalized. So that is really important. So if you've got a concept or idea that's not your own, if the words are not quite your own, all you need to do is reference it using the Harvard referencing system in brackets. Just name your source. That's all. And that's all we need to do. Okay, so there is a lot to take in there. We'll just hop on to the next slide. So now, okay, I've touched on this just a minute ago, but we're now what we expect of you, A, B, E. So in terms of a marker, I take about 15 minutes per script to mark. So what I need is a lot of the keywords and a lot of the evaluation. And that's what I mean about discussion flowing. So if it comes across as a list, okay, I basically will have a cap on it, and I will move on to the next task and move on to the next script if the paper marking just is full of lists. Okay, so we have, just note that we have a cap on the lists or the theories. They only make up about half of the question. I expect to see examples, and I expect to see your own analysis amongst that. In terms of moderating, so what I do is I look at how other people are marking, and it takes even less time to moderate because, again, it's not a lot of time. So you need to be very clear when you're expressing yourselves in each of these responses. So try to say the most in the least amount of words possible and in a very simple way possible, which is difficult to do. Hence why level 6 is a lot more difficult. Again, plagiarism, read your course material, source handbook. The software will detect if you're not using your own sources. And also, if you're copying somebody else's work, colleagues, we have software to actually detect how much how much has been copied. And then again, the learner will be penalized. Screenshots, I see a lot of these sometimes, and they are not acceptable. So if you're trying to illustrate a point by using a screenshot from a study guide or from the internet, that is really not acceptable. That will not be marked. So try your best to use your own words. Again, I'll stress about theory dumps. Yeah, so 50% or less of the task needs to be theory. The rest needs to be your judgment and supported evidence, such as examples. So there is a lot expected of you as a learner in level 6. And we'll move on to the next slide, which is feedback questions. So if you have any feedback or questions, please direct them to the product team and they will come to me, and amongst us, we will get back to you as quick as we can. We normally turn queries around very quickly. So again, feel free to have any queries regarding this presentation directed towards the team at ABE. And finally, thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and feel free to, any feedback will be welcome. I shall leave you to it. Thank you and bye for now.